Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the frozen, forgotten corners of small towns, where Christmas cheer masks secrets buried in shadowed homes, across icy streets, and within abandoned forests. 10 true stories, tales of gifts that hid terror, laughter that turned to screams, and nights that never ended. These are not legends passed down. They are real encounters, lived and remembered. From shadows that move on their own to voices mimicking the living. From entities stalking the trees to crimes hidden beneath the snow, darkness reigns. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of these festive nights, where the ordinary ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Reed, and this happened during Christmas of 2017, back when I lived alone in a small rental cabin just outside Bangor, Maine. I had moved there to get away from the noise of the city, and honestly, from the noise inside my own head. I had just gone through a breakup. My mother had passed away earlier that year, and Christmas felt less like a holiday and more like a reminder of everything I'd lost. On December 22nd, the first strange thing happened. I came home from work and found a red wool scarf hanging on my front doorknob, bright red, perfectly folded, and lightly dusted with snow. I assumed a neighbor left it by mistake, until I realized something. I didn't have neighbors. My closest one lived half a mile down the road. I brought it inside anyway, shaking off the cold. But the moment I hung it over a chair, I noticed the fabric was warm, as if someone had just been wearing it seconds before. That night, as I lay in bed, the wooden floor outside my room creaked slowly, deliberately, like someone was pacing. I told myself it was the house settling, but around 2 a.m., I woke up freezing. My bedroom window, locked earlier, was now cracked open 2 inches, and next to it on the sill sat the red scarf, coiled neatly, like a gift or a warning. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept staring at that scarf on the windowsill, watching the fabric ripple slightly in the breeze coming from the cracked window. I didn't know why, but I didn't want to touch it again, not after finding it inside my bedroom. The next morning, I walked around the cabin, trying to make sense of it. There were no footprints in the snow below the window, none leading up to the house, none leading away, nothing but a flawless sheet of white. That's when the second strange thing happened. Around noon, while I was chopping firewood, I noticed something red at the tree line about 50 feet away. At first, I thought it was a cardinal, but then it moved, slowly, deliberately, behind the trees. A figure, tall and thin, wearing a long red scarf, just standing there. I called out thinking maybe someone from town wandered too far into the woods, but the figure didn't answer. It didn't even flinch. It just stepped backward, disappearing behind a pine trunk like it had been swallowed by the forest. I ran to the tree line, but when I got there, the woods were silent, empty. That night, I locked every window twice. I checked the doors 3 times. But around 3:30 a.m., I woke to the unmistakable sound of someone breathing just outside my bedroom door. Slow, heavy, steady, and the faintest whisper. Cold. In here, I froze. I didn't know if I was dreaming or awake, but the breathing was real. Thick, deliberate, almost congested, like someone with frostbitten lungs trying to inhale. My bedroom door was locked, but that suddenly didn't feel like much protection. For a full minute, the breathing stayed right there on the other side. Then it slowly drifted down the hallway, toward the living room. I grabbed the fireplace poker, cracked the door open, and peered out. No one. But something had changed. The red scarf, which I'd left in the kitchen, was now lying at the center of the hallway, perfectly spiraled, like a snake coiled in the moonlight, as if someone had placed it there and smoothed out every wrinkle. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. Instead, I checked every room, every corner, every inch of shadow. Nothing. But when I opened the front door to check outside, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Footprints, not human ones. The prints were too long, too narrow, with 5 long, bony toe-like impressions that dug deep into the snow. They led from the forest to my door, and then back toward the tree line, but I hadn't heard anyone leave. I followed them only a few steps before I saw it. Another red scarf, tied around the trunk of a tree, fluttering slightly in the icy wind. By the next morning, I was debating whether to pack up and leave the cabin entirely. But rent was cheap, my job was nearby, and part of me still tried to rationalize everything. Maybe the footprints were some kind of animal deformity. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe I was losing it. But the fourth event destroyed every rational explanation I had left. On Christmas Eve, I returned home from a grocery run and found something waiting for me on the porch. A gift box, wrapped in silver paper, a small card taped to the top. My name was written on it. Not printed, written, in the exact handwriting my mother used to sign Christmas cards with. My heart dropped. She'd been gone for almost a year. I took the box inside, hands shaking. For 10 minutes, I just stared at it on the table, afraid to open it. Finally, I pulled the ribbon loose and lifted the lid. Inside was an old photograph, a picture of me as a child, standing in the snow with my mother. I remembered the day. I remembered the scarf I was wearing. It was red. The same red scarf now haunting my cabin. But the photo had something new in it, something not there before. Behind us, partly hidden in the woods, was the tall, thin figure with the long red scarf, watching us from decades ago. I dropped the photograph like it burned me. My mind couldn't wrap around it. That figure, whatever it was, had been around my family long before I ever moved to Maine, before I even understood fear, before I even knew it existed. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the picture, trying to convince myself it was edited, altered, a hallucination, anything but real. But the paper felt old. The edges yellowed. The ink faded naturally. This wasn't fake. And that meant someone, or something, had been following me since childhood. At 11 p.m., I made the decision to leave the cabin the next morning. But the moment I turned off the lights and got ready for bed, I noticed something outside the window. Movement. Something tall standing between the trees, watching the house. I whispered to myself, "Don't move. Don't look again." But I did. The figure took a step forward into the moonlight. This time, I could finally see its face, or rather, its lack of one. A smooth, frost-covered surface where eyes should be. A stretched, lipless line where a mouth should go. And wrapped around its neck, the same red scarf, the one hanging on my chair. The one tied to the tree, the one from the photograph. It lifted a long, skeletal hand and pointed directly at me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair as the figure's hand stayed frozen in that single, deliberate point toward my window. Its body didn't sway. Its shoulders didn't rise or fall. It stood impossibly still, like a statue made of frost and hunger. I shut the curtain so fast, the rod nearly came out of the wall. My breath fogged the air as I called 911. My voice shook. "There's someone outside my house. Tall, pale, maybe injured." Dispatch told me a unit was on the way. But the nearest town was 25 minutes from the cabin, and whatever stood outside wasn't moving like anything human. 10 minutes passed, then 15. No footsteps, no knocking. Just silence pressing against every wall of the cabin. Then I smelled it. Cold, not winter cold. Rotten cold, like damp earth mixed with old leaves and something metallic. It seeped through the cracks of the window frame, through the floorboards, through my skin. A soft tapping came from the window, not knocking. Tapping, soft, rhythmic, like a fingernail made of bone. I grabbed the fireplace poker and, against every instinct, opened the curtain a sliver. The figure was gone, but the red scarf was now tied tightly around the outside of the window handle, knotted like a noose. And underneath it, etched into the frost, a single word: "Come." I backed away from the window until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. Something inside me snapped. Fear mixed with anger, with a desperate instinct to survive. I wasn't going outside. I wasn't following it. I wasn't coming anywhere. When the police finally arrived, 2 officers stepped out, scanning the tree line with flashlights. I ran out the door, nearly slipping on the frozen steps, trying to explain everything at once. There was something here. Someone. Tall, faceless, wearing a scarf. It left this... I pointed at the window. The scarf was gone. The word carved in frost had melted. The officers exchanged a look. The kind you give someone who's not lying, but not well. "Sir, are you sure you're getting enough rest?" one asked softly. They did a full sweep of the property. Found nothing. No prints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing tying anything to the bizarre events of the last 3 days. They left around 1:40 a.m., their tire tracks fading into the darkness. For a moment, I thought it was over. The house was silent. The forest still. My breathing finally slowed. Then I noticed something new. Under the Christmas tree, one I hadn't decorated much since moving there, a small red-wrapped present now sat at the base. I hadn't put it there. The tag said, "I'm waiting, D." My mother used to sign her notes that way, except the handwriting wasn't hers. My hands shook as I knelt beside the present. I didn't want to touch it, but something inside me, curiosity, fear, anger, pushed me forward. The box was cold, colder than the air, almost painfully cold against my fingertips. When I unwrapped it, snowflakes spilled out onto the floor, fresh snowflakes. Inside was another photograph. This one was different. It was taken from inside my cabin, from the hallway, looking directly at my bedroom door. And in the picture, I was asleep inside. I fell backward, scrambling away from the box. My chest tightened. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. That thing had been inside the house again. It had walked past me while I slept. Then I noticed something else in the photo. The door behind me, my bedroom door, was cracked open. A shadow stood in the gap, almost invisible. Almost. Except for the faint outline of a scarf. I dropped the photo and ran to my bedroom. The door was wide open. My pillows were on the floor. The blankets were pulled back neatly, like someone had tucked me in and smoothed the wrinkles with care. That rotten cold smell filled the room again. And on my pillow lay a single long, thin piece of fabric. A torn strip from the red scarf. Still warm, still moving slightly, as if it had just been touched. At that point, survival instincts finally overrode fear. I packed a bag in seconds. Wallet, keys, phone, flashlight. Nothing else mattered. I wasn't staying another minute in that cabin. As I opened the front door, the wind howled violently, whipping snow across the porch. It felt colder than any winter storm I'd felt in my life. Then I saw them. Footprints. Long, narrow, the same bony impressions as before. But this time, they didn't lead away into the woods. They led around the cabin, circling it, loop after loop after loop, hundreds of times. Whatever had been watching me had been doing it for hours. I bolted to my truck, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut. My hands shook as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine didn't turn. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, it finally roared to life. But before I shifted into reverse, something moved in the beams of my headlights. The tall figure stepped out from behind the shed, slowly, deliberately, snow blowing past its faceless head. It lifted its arm again, long, skeletal, and pointed straight at my truck. Then, its jawless mouth stretched slightly, as if it were trying to mimic a smile it didn't understand. The scarf blew sideways in the wind. Then the figure began walking toward me, and the lights started to flicker. I slammed the truck into reverse so hard the transmission screamed. The tires spun against the ice before catching enough traction to launch me backward onto the forest road. The figure broke into a sprint, a horrible, inhuman sprint. Long, gliding strides like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. It moved effortlessly across the snow, its limbs bending with unnatural looseness. I floored the gas. The truck fishtailed, slid, and finally gained speed. The figure grew distant in the rearview mirror, but never small enough. It reached the edge of the forest road and stopped abruptly, as if hitting an invisible wall. And then, it tilted its head, slowly, curiously, almost lovingly. The scarf whipped violently around its neck as it raised both arms at once. Fingers splayed. Snow spiraled upward around it, forming a vortex of white and red as the scarf unraveled into the air. The last thing I saw was its shape dissolving back into the trees, step by step, until the darkness swallowed it whole. I didn't stop driving until sunrise. I never went back to that cabin. But 3 days later, at the motel I was staying in, someone slid an envelope under my door. Inside was a single new photograph. Me, standing in the motel parking lot, taken the night before. Behind me, in the tree line, barely visible, a thin shape wearing red, waiting. My name is Lauren Keller, and what happened to me 2 Christmases ago is something I still struggle to explain. I was living alone in a rented duplex in Vermont, working double shifts at the hospital, too exhausted to think about decorating for the holidays. Christmas used to mean something when my brother Ethan was alive, but after he died in a car accident 5 years ago, on Christmas Eve, I avoided anything that reminded me of the season. It was December 14th when I came home after a night shift and noticed something strange. The porch light was off when I left that morning, but now a warm golden glow spilled across the snow. Hanging above the door was a Christmas wreath, pine needles fresh, red ribbon bright, and tiny ornaments reflecting the street light. I hadn't bought a wreath. I hadn't decorated anything. I stood there for a moment, staring at it with a tight chest, trying to convince myself that the landlord must have put it up. But he'd never once decorated, not in the 2 years I'd lived there. When I stepped inside, an even stranger detail hit me. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine. My living room was dark, untouched, exactly how I left it. But as I locked the door behind me, I noticed footprints, small, faint indentations in the frost near the doormat. They weren't mine, and they weren't made by boots. They looked like bare feet, small ones, like a child's. I tried to shake it off. Footprints could be from the neighbor's kid messing around, right? I brushed the snow from my scrubs, warmed some leftover pasta, and microwaved it while convincing myself I was just overtired. But that cinnamon smell followed me into the kitchen. It wasn't a candle. Too natural, too strong, almost like walking into a Christmas market. Around 3 a.m., I finally collapsed into bed. I remember thinking how quiet the house was, how heavy my eyelids felt. Sometime before dawn, a faint jingling sound woke me. Not loud, just a soft, metallic chime, like those tiny bells people hang on wreaths or pets' collars. It came from the living room. At first, I stayed frozen. I tried listening for movement, but the house settled back into silence. After a minute, I forced myself to get up and check. The living room was empty, completely normal. No decorations, no wreath inside, and definitely no bells. I returned to my bedroom and froze. My door, closed when I left, was now slightly open. On the floor, right outside the crack, sat a small metal bell, bright silver, perfectly polished, cold to the touch. I hadn't owned anything like it. As I stared at it, a memory hit me with a force that knocked air from my chest. My brother Ethan used to collect bells. He gave me one every Christmas, and this bell, this was identical to the one he gave me the year before he died. The rational part of me screamed that someone had broken into my home, someone who knew about my brother, someone playing a sick game. I checked every window, every door, even the attic hatch. Nothing was broken, nothing disturbed. No signs of entry except that one bell. I placed it on the kitchen counter, refusing to touch it again. The next evening, after another shift, the duplex felt different the moment I stepped inside. Warmer, brighter, wrong. I flipped the living room light and gasped. There, standing in the corner, was a Christmas tree. A fully decorated 6-foot pine I absolutely did not buy. White lights glowed softly through the branches. Glass ornaments sparkled red and gold. And on top sat a small silver star, an old-fashioned one, scratched at the edges. I stumbled back against the wall. This wasn't just a prank. This was impossible. Nobody could have gotten inside without breaking a lock or window. Nobody could have done this quietly. Nobody knew the way Ethan decorated trees because the ornaments were the same style he always used. The star on top was identical to the one he insisted we place every year since we were kids. Then I noticed something else. At the bottom of the tree, barely visible beneath a branch, lay a second silver bell. This one had something etched onto the surface. 4 numbers. The year Ethan died. I backed away from the tree, my breath unsteady. My brother loved Christmas. He used to laugh while stringing lights, hum old carols under his breath. But after he died, anything festive made me nauseous. I stopped celebrating. I avoided anything with red, green, gold, bells, ornaments, all of it. So seeing that tree felt like a punch to the gut. A reminder, or maybe a message. I grabbed the phone and called my friend Nicole. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't. But I asked if she could come over. "Laura, it's midnight. Can it wait?" she said. Her voice was tired. I didn't blame her. After hesitating, I told her never mind. I fell asleep on the couch that night, exhausted and terrified. Sometime in the early morning, I woke up to what sounded like wrapping paper. The slow, deliberate tearing of ribbon. I sat up and stared into the darkness. The sound stopped instantly. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe. After a full minute, curiosity overpowered fear. I reached for the lamp and turned it on. There were now presents under the tree, at least 8 of them, neatly wrapped with red foil paper I had never seen before. Each one had a tag. Each tag had my name, and every single one was signed from Ethan. But the one that made my blood freeze was the largest box at the back. Its tag didn't say my name at all. It said, "Welcome home." I didn't open the gifts. I didn't touch them. I sat on the couch with my knees pulled up, staring at the pile while my heart pounded against my ribs. The silence in the house felt heavier, thicker, like something alive was listening from just out of sight. I wrapped myself in a blanket and tried to stay awake. But exhaustion eventually pulled me under. When I woke again, sunlight flooded the room. The presents were still there, untouched. For a moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined the worst parts. But reality punched that hope down fast when I walked into the kitchen. All the cabinets were open, every single one. Plates stacked neatly on the counter, glasses arranged in rows, silverware sorted into little piles like someone was preparing for guests. And on the kitchen table sat another bell, this one larger, tarnished around the rim. A folded piece of paper lay beneath it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a note written in the same handwriting Ethan used on his old birthday cards. "You stopped decorating. You stopped remembering. You stopped letting me in." My throat tightened. "Ethan is gone," I whispered into the empty air. "This isn't him." And that's when I heard it. A soft giggle, a child's giggle, coming from the living room. I spun around. Standing by the Christmas tree was a small figure in the shadows. Too short to be an adult, too still to be human. The figure didn't move, didn't sway. It simply stood there, half hidden behind the illuminated Christmas tree. My breath caught in my throat. The lights of the tree flickered once, twice, and then glowed steadily again, casting enough brightness for me to see more clearly. The figure was a child, a boy, wearing old-fashioned pajamas, white with thin red stripes, and bare feet. His hair was messy, sticking up in soft curls. For a moment, he looked almost real, almost like he could have been Ethan at age 7. But the face wasn't quite right. The eyes were too dark, too bottomless, reflecting nothing but shadows. The smile was too wide, stretching just a little too far. "Are you here to help decorate?" the child whispered, but his lips didn't move. The voice came from somewhere behind me, echoing from the kitchen, though nothing was there. I stumbled backward, gripping the counter edge. "Who? What are you?" The boy tilted his head. The smile never changed. Slowly, he pointed to the presents under the tree. "He can't come in until you open them," he said, this time his lips moving, the voice sounding like multiple overlapping whispers. "You have to open the gifts." The lights around him dimmed, flickered, then surged brighter, washing the room in a warm, golden glow that suddenly felt suffocating. The boy vanished. simply dissolved into the air like his body was made of dust. Only the tree remained, and the presence, and the overwhelming feeling that something was waiting inside them. I backed into the hallway and grabbed my coat, ready to bolt out the front door and never return. But when I reached the door, I froze. All the locks, 3 of them, had been slid back into place. From the inside, while I had been in the kitchen, the metal felt warm under my fingers, as though someone had touched them seconds before. I forced myself toward the back door. Same thing. Locked, warm, wrong. Panic rose like a tidal wave. I grabbed my phone to call Nicole, but the screen was black. Dead. Not low battery, completely dead. I felt the room tighten around me, like the walls were listening. The scent of pine grew stronger. Sweet, sickly sweet. And somewhere inside the house, a music box began to play. Slow, delicate notes of Silent Night, drifting through the hallway like a lullaby played underwater. A soft thump sounded behind me. I turned. Another present had appeared under the tree. A small one this time, wrapped in white paper with a red ribbon tied perfectly around it. No tag. Just sitting there like it had always belonged. My knees trembled. My heart pounded. But something in me, grief, fear, desperation, pushed me to pick it up. The box was light. Too light. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single torn piece of red fabric. The same pajamas the child wore, and stained across the fabric was dried blood. I dropped the box, my breath catching in my chest as the music box continued its haunting melody. I didn't own a music box. I didn't know where it was. The sound echoed from every room, surrounding me like the house itself was singing. I backed toward the hallway, clutching the wall for balance, trying to find the source. The melody grew louder near the stairs. Halfway up, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then all at once the entire upstairs hallway lit up. Soft yellow bulbs, Christmas lights, strung neatly along the railing, twisting up the banister toward my bedroom. I hadn't put them up. At the top of the stairs lay something small, round, a silver bell. The 4th one. This one was cracked down the side, the metal split like it had been crushed under something heavy. I reached the landing and felt a gust of warm air brush past me. The smell of cinnamon grew stronger, so strong it made my stomach twist. My bedroom door, which I always kept closed, was now wide open. Inside, everything was decorated. Garland across the headboard, ornaments hanging from the curtain rod, a string of lights outlining the window in a perfect frame. And on the bed sat the child, swinging his legs slowly, smiling too wide, holding a final, unopened present wrapped in golden paper. "This one," he said softly, "is from him." I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to breathe. The child held the golden present in both hands, rocking slightly as though waiting for permission to move. The lights in the room flickered gently, like breathing. His smile never faded. "You miss him," the boy whispered. But the voice that came out wasn't his. It was Ethan's. My brother's voice, soft, warm, exactly how I remembered it before he died. My legs nearly buckled. Tears stung my eyes. "Stop," I whispered. "You're not him." The child tilted his head. "But he wants to see you." His voice deepened, distorted, layered with echoes. "He wants to come home." The present in his lap began to shake. The wrapping paper stretched outward, bulging, as though something inside was pushing from beneath. The shape wasn't consistent. Sometimes small, sometimes large, sometimes too long to be a hand. "I won't open it," I said, backing away. The child's face darkened. The smile faded, replaced by an unnatural stillness that chilled me to the core. "Open it," he hissed, this time in a voice not human at all. The lights snapped off. The room plunged into darkness, except for the tree downstairs glowing faintly. I could hear the child's breathing. Deep, slow, wrong. Something touched my ankle. Ice cold, small, like a hand. I screamed and stumbled backward, slamming into the hallway wall. The moment I hit the hallway floor, the lights snapped back on. The child was gone. The present was gone. My room was exactly the way it was before. Plain, undecorated, empty. No garlands, no lights, no child, no warmth, nothing. I scrambled downstairs, grabbing my keys and sprinting to the front door. This time, the locks were ice cold, frozen stiff, but they slid open effortlessly. As I yanked the door open, cold air blasted my face. Snow covered the porch. The wreath was gone. The cinnamon scent vanished instantly. I fled to my car barefoot, not caring about the cold slicing through my skin. I sped away without looking back. 3 days later, I returned with police. They searched the entire house. Nothing. No decorations, no tree, no presents, no bells. They found no fingerprints except mine. No signs of break-ins, no footprints except my own in the snow outside. But as the officers prepared to leave, one of them called me over to the living room window. "Ma'am, did you put this here?" My stomach dropped. Hanging from the curtain rod was a single silver bell. Small, polished, perfect, not cracked, not tarnished, and etched neatly into the metal, fresh, precise, was my brother's handwriting. Next Christmas. My name is Lucas, and this happened when I was 16. During one of the coldest Christmas weeks our town in Minnesota had ever seen. My mom was working double shifts at the hospital. My dad was out of state for a construction job. And I stayed alone most nights in our small house at the end of a long, frozen driveway. That week, the snow kept falling, thick, heavy, suffocating layers of white. School was closed, roads were barely drivable, and silence hung over the whole neighborhood like a blanket. On the second night of the storm, I noticed something strange at the edge of our property. A snowman. I hadn't built it. No one in the neighborhood ever walked that far during storms, and it was too perfectly shaped for a random passerby. 3 round sections, stick arms, a crooked carrot nose. But what bothered me wasn't the snowman itself. It was its position, turned toward the house, facing my bedroom window. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe some kids had done it. But the next morning, I woke to something that made my stomach drop. The snowman had moved. Not much, just a few feet closer. But now its head was tilted upward, facing directly at my bedroom window. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wind had pushed it. Maybe blowing snow made it seem closer. But when I went outside to check, I saw something that instantly killed all logical explanations. Footprints. A clear trail of large, deep footprints led from the woods across the road to where the snowman stood. But there were no footprints leading away. Just a single path going toward the snowman's original position. The new position, several feet closer, had no footprints at all, as if it had glided across the surface without disturbing a single inch of powder. Mom was working a 20-hour shift and wouldn't be home until the next morning, so I tried distracting myself with movies. But every time I passed by a window, I felt the same thing. The snowman was watching me. Around 5 p.m., I checked again. My heart hammered when I saw it. Closer, much closer. Now it was halfway up the driveway. And the head wasn't just tilted. It was turned unnaturally far, like the neck was rotating too freely, too sharply. That night, as I tried to sleep, something began tapping on my window. Slow, measured, hollow, like a wooden stick. I sat up in bed instantly, heart thudding, sweat already forming despite the freezing air. The tapping was gentle but intentional. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I didn't want to look. I didn't even want to breathe. Eventually, after what felt like minutes of pure dread, I forced myself to glance at the window. Nothing. Just thick frost and swirling flakes. But the tapping continued. This time, from downstairs, I crept down the hall, every step slow, careful, listening for anything in the silence. When I reached the living room, the tapping grew louder, like something was knocking on the glass door that led to the backyard. I peeked from behind the curtain. There, standing in the backyard, was the snowman. Not the front yard, not the driveway. The backyard, right outside the sliding glass door. Its stick arm was raised, tapping lightly on the glass. And now, Now there was something new. A mouth. A wide, stretched out line carved into the snow, as if someone had clawed a smile into it. As soon as I saw it, every hair on my body stood on end. It hadn't had a mouth before. I stumbled backward, crashing into the coffee table, trembling so hard I could barely stand. That movement must have caught its attention, because the snowman's head jerked slightly, like it was trying to follow me. No wind, no shifting ice. It moved on its own. I closed the curtain, locked the sliding door, and ran upstairs. The police wouldn't believe me, I told myself. A snowman is stalking me. Sounds like a joke, even in a town filled with bored cops. I tried calling my mom, but she didn't respond. Probably busy, probably oblivious to the nightmare happening at home. I spent the next hour barricaded in my room. I didn't dare look outside, didn't dare move. Then, footsteps, not normal ones, slow, heavy, crunching in the snow. But the sound was coming from above me, from the roof. I heard dragging, a low scraping noise, something shifting its weight on the shingles. Then a thud, right above my bedroom. That's when the lights flickered, then died. I was plunged into darkness as something began pressing down on my roof. Slowly, deliberately, like it was kneeling, crawling, positioning itself above the window. The tapping returned, this time from the glass right beside my bed. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. It felt like something outside was waiting for exactly that. Movement, fear, attention. So I stayed still, breathing softly, listening as the tapping grew more impatient, faster, almost excited. Finally, I worked up the courage to peek through a tiny gap in the curtains. I wish I hadn't. The snowman's face was inches away, pressed against the glass outside my second-floor window. Its mouth had widened into a jagged grin that stretched nearly across its entire head. The carrot nose had elongated, sharpened to a point, and where its eyes should have been, there were just hollow, black indentations filled with packed ice. But the worst part? Its body wasn't shaped like a snowman anymore. The middle and lower sections had thinned and lengthened, forming something more like a humanoid torso and legs sculpted from snow and twigs. It was transforming, changing, becoming. The tapping turned to scratching as its pointed stick fingers traced slowly along the glass, searching for a weakness. I could hear the faint crack of ice forming spiderweb patterns across the window. Then, suddenly, the scratching stopped. The snowman slowly turned its head toward the driveway, as if something else had arrived. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it. The crunch of tires grinding through fresh snow. A car was turning onto our driveway. Headlights cast long beams across the yard, and for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of hope. Mom. She must have gotten off her shift early. The snowman, or whatever it was, slithered back into the darkness, sinking down the side of the house in a way no human shape should be able to. I crept to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to see. Mom's car pulled in, her headlights sweeping across the front yard and illuminating something horrifying. There were dozens of snowmen lining the driveway, all facing the house, all different shapes, heights, and sizes. Some missing faces, some missing limbs, some turned at angles bones shouldn't bend. One thing united them. Each one pointed toward the house. Mom stepped out of the car, exhaustion on her face, completely unaware. She paused, confused, staring at the snowmen. But before she could react, something moved behind her. The tall one. The first one. It rose up beside her like a towering white shadow. I threw open the window and screamed her name. Mom froze when she heard me shout, looking around blindly for the source. The tall creature stood silently behind her, its long, snow-carved fingers hovering inches from her shoulder. It wasn't attacking. It was waiting, almost like it wanted me to watch. I yelled again, louder, leaning halfway out the window. This time she saw it. She spun around, staggered backward, slipping on the ice. Her scream cut through the silence, raw and terrified. She scrambled toward the house, but the driveway was too slick. She couldn't get traction. The creature didn't chase her. Instead, All the other snowmen began turning, slowly, simultaneously, heads pivoting toward her with a sickening grinding noise. Mom crawled across the icy ground, desperately trying to reach the porch. I bolted downstairs, grabbed the baseball bat by the door, and threw it open. Freezing wind slammed into me as I ran toward her, slipping, nearly falling myself. That's when I saw the tall snowman finally move. Not quickly, not aggressively, just fluidly. It extended one long arm and pointed at me. The other snowmen followed, one by one, all turning their stick arms toward me, as if I was the reason they were here. I reached Mom and helped her to her feet, dragging her toward the house. She was shaking uncontrollably, mumbling, "What are they? What are they?" over and over again. The snowmen didn't advance, but they didn't need to. Their silent, perfect formation made the whole world feel wrong, like reality itself was warping around us. Inside, I slammed the door, locked it, shoved the couch against it. Mom grabbed the house phone, but the line was dead. The power flickered again, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room except for the faint blue glow of moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. Then came the sound, a deep, rumbling vibration. Not from the house, from beneath it. The floorboards trembled under our feet, like something enormous was moving underground, shifting the frozen earth. Mom grabbed my arm, terrified. "Lucas, we need to hide." But before we could move, the tall snow creature stepped into view through the living room window. It leaned its massive face against the glass, scanning the room with those hollow, icy indentations. Then, raising one arm, it pointed downward, toward the basement door, as if telling us where to go, as if hurting us. Mom shook her head violently. "We're not going down there," she whispered, clutching my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. We backed away from the basement door, but the rumbling beneath us intensified, like something dragging massive limbs through dirt. Then, without warning, the basement door began to open by itself, slowly, creaking. Cold air poured into the hallway, far colder than anything outside. My breath turned to mist instantly, billowing in front of me. Mom screamed and pushed me behind her. From the darkness of the staircase, something began rising. Not snow, not a figure, but arms, dozens of them. Arms made of packed snow, branches, ice, and something darker, something that looked disturbingly like bone, reaching up the stairs, feeling along the walls, pulling themselves upward. The tall snow creature outside pressed its head harder against the window, as if watching our reaction, as if waiting. The basement arms inched closer, scraping the floor, crawling over one another, reaching for our legs. Mom grabbed a fireplace poker and swung wildly, smashing the nearest limb. It exploded like brittle ice, but another took its place instantly. We ran, upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind us. The scratching began immediately on the other side, and then the whispering. The whispering seeped through the cracks around the bedroom door. Layered voices, faint but clear, all chanting the same phrase in a language I couldn't recognize. Mom held the doorknob shut while I pushed a dresser in front of it. The scratching and pounding grew louder as the arms battered the hallway outside. Then the window behind us shattered. The tall snow creature climbed through, its massive frame bending unnaturally as it squeezed into the room. Snow cascaded across the floor, freezing everything it touched. Mom screamed and swung the poker, but the creature caught it effortlessly, the metal freezing solid in its grip before snapping it in half like a twig. It leaned close, so close I could hear the crackling of ice shifting beneath its snowy surface. Its hollow eyes stared into mine, and for a moment, I felt something. Recognition. Like it knew me. Like it had always known me. Then it spoke. A deep, icy whisper. Cold. Keeps you alive. Warmth. Melts you. Choose. The arms burst through the door behind us. Mom grabbed my hand. We jumped through the broken window, landing hard in the snow below. Pain shot up my legs, but we ran. Through the yard, past the driveway full of snowmen, into the freezing woods. Behind us, the snowmen didn't chase. They simply watched, waiting. We never went back to that house again. And every Christmas since, I still find a snowman standing somewhere near my home. My name is Emily, and this happened when I was 12. It was Christmas Eve, and the storm outside had coated our small Michigan town in a thick blanket of snow. My parents were at a late-night holiday party, and I was home alone with my older brother, who had gone to a friend's house. I was excited for Christmas morning, wrapping presents, sipping hot cocoa, and humming along to the carols on TV. That's when I noticed it. A small porcelain doll sitting in the corner of the living room, staring at me. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't one of our decorations. Its painted eyes seemed almost alive, and its tiny head tilted slightly, as if following my every movement. I laughed nervously, thinking my imagination was running wild. But when I set down my mug, I could have sworn its lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. I told myself it was just the shadows from the Christmas tree lights playing tricks. But later, when I got up to grab a blanket, the doll was closer. It had moved, not far, just a few inches, but enough to make my skin crawl. My heart pounded as I stepped back, trying to convince myself it was impossible. Dolls don't move. And yet, when I blinked, I swore its head turned to the window, like it was listening for something outside, something waiting for me. I tried ignoring the doll, focusing on the Christmas tree, hoping my fear was just my imagination. But as the night stretched on, I began hearing faint creaks from the living room floorboards. At first, I blamed the house settling. Old houses creak. But the creaking seemed timed with small, soft thuds, almost like something was walking around very lightly. My stomach knotted. I cautiously stood up, heart thumping, and walked toward the doll. Its porcelain face stared directly at me, unnervingly calm. I reached out to pick it up, and as soon as my fingers touched the cold ceramic, I felt a tiny vibration through its body, like a faint heartbeat. I jerked back. My pulse raced, and my mind screamed at me to put it down. Then I noticed something else. Tiny scratches in the floor surrounding the doll, barely visible but jagged and deep, like it had scraped itself across the wood. I froze. Dolls don't move. Dolls don't scratch floors. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, a faint, childlike voice coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Emily, come closer." I spun around. The living room was empty. My heart throbbed painfully in my chest. I didn't want to admit it, but the doll had spoken. I tried to leave the room, to run upstairs and lock myself in my bedroom, but my feet felt heavy. Every step toward the stairs seemed like moving through molasses. When I glanced back, the doll was no longer in the corner. It was halfway across the room. I froze, wide-eyed. How could it have moved so fast? I didn't hear it. I didn't see anyone touch it. Yet, there it was, sitting neatly as if nothing had happened. Its painted eyes now glimmered under the flickering Christmas lights. I picked up a pillow, clutching it like a weapon, and approached the doll cautiously. "Who? What are you?" I whispered. There was no reply, only silence. Then, without warning, the doll tilted its head sharply toward the window. I whipped around. Outside, shadows from the snowstorm shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed almost human, but distorted, tall, and impossible. I backed away, tripping over a rug, landing hard on the floor. When I looked up, the doll was closer again, perched now at the edge of the Christmas tree, smiling wider than before. I could see tiny cracks along its porcelain face, almost like it was stretching. Something in my chest tightened. I realized, with sickening clarity, that the doll was tracking me. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to get away, and ran toward the stairs. Behind me, the doll seemed to float a few inches above the floor, gliding unnaturally. Its tiny hands twitched like they were reaching for me. Panic surged, and I made it to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. My chest heaved, hot tears stinging my eyes. I sat on the bed, trembling, clutching my knees. The whisper returned, soft, taunting. "Emily, open the door. Play with me." It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I shook my head violently. It couldn't be real. Dolls don't speak. Dolls don't move. Dolls don't breathe. But then came the tapping. Not on the door, on the window. Slow, deliberate, like tiny fingernails scraping the glass. I inched toward the window and peeked through the curtains. My stomach dropped. The doll was outside, standing in the snow, staring up at me. And it wasn't alone. Behind it, I could make out faint shapes. Smaller dolls, lined up like soldiers, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. One by one, they raised their tiny porcelain arms, pointing directly at my window. And then, the tallest shadow, the first doll, smiled wider than humanly possible. I backed away, shaking uncontrollably. My phone had no signal. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. I heard the floorboards creak beneath the doll's weight, not outside. Inside. The doll was in my room. I turned slowly. It was on my desk, staring at me with hollow eyes that seemed impossibly alive. Its smile stretched unnaturally, porcelain cracking as if breathing. And in its hands, it held something new. A tiny replica of me. A miniature porcelain doll that matched my exact features. A chill ran down my spine. It placed the doll on my bed. "We play together now," the whisper said again. The smaller doll's eyes blinked. Not painted, actual blinking. I bolted toward the closet, slamming the door behind me, pressing my back against it. The whispering grew louder. Multiple voices now, overlapping. "Emily, come out. Play. Forever." Then, from somewhere in the room, a soft tap, tap, tap. Like tiny porcelain fingers walking across the floor, coming closer. I stayed in the closet for what felt like hours, unable to move, trying to control my shaking. Every now and then, I would hear the doll move. Tiny, scuffing noises, faint whispers repeating my name. My imagination. Maybe. But the miniature replica on the bed had shifted position slightly each time I peeked. I finally gathered courage and threw open the closet door. My bedroom was empty. The doll and the tiny replica were gone. I checked the hallway, the living room, even the kitchen. Nothing. Just an eerie silence, broken only by the snowstorm outside. I convinced myself I had fallen asleep in the closet and dreamed the whole thing. I went back to bed, heart still racing. But when I pulled the blanket over me, I felt something cold on my ankle. I froze. My eyes darted down. The miniature doll, lying at the foot of my bed, staring up at me, its mouth stretched wider. And there was a note carved into the porcelain. "See you tomorrow, Emily." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't breathe much either. The next morning, my parents returned, laughing and carrying presents. I tried to tell them, but the words caught in my throat. How do you explain a doll that moves on its own, speaks and makes mini replicas of you? I pretended everything was fine, helping them with decorations and opening presents. But my gaze kept drifting to the corner. And there it was. The doll, sitting on the mantel this time. Calm, innocent, smiling. I froze. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. It didn't move in front of me. But I knew. I knew it had been watching all night, waiting, learning. I avoided it for hours, tried to ignore it while wrapping up chores. But every movement I made seemed tracked. Its eyes followed me like dark liquid, hollow and hungry. By evening, I was too scared to even be alone in the living room. I tried hiding in my parents' bedroom. I thought I had escaped, but I heard it. The tiny tapping of porcelain fingers climbing the walls. And then, a soft voice, almost cheerful, from somewhere above me. Your turn tomorrow. Over the next few days, strange things escalated. The doll would vanish and reappear in impossible places. Inside the fridge, hanging from the ceiling fan, sitting in the bathtub. Each time it moved, the miniature replica followed. The replica always appeared first, as if scouting me, and then the full-size doll emerged. I tried leaving the house once, going to a friend's place. When I returned, the doll was sitting on the doorstep, staring at me. Its painted eyes glinted in the streetlight, and inside its hand, another note. You can't leave. I began sleeping with the lights on, clutching blankets like shields. But even in the brightest room, I could feel its presence, watching, patient, waiting. My parents thought I was imagining things, and I couldn't blame them. The worst part? I started noticing small scratches on my arms and legs each morning. Tiny, precise, like fingernails scraping skin. But no one else was home. By Christmas Eve, I was living in fear. I barricaded doors, turned on every light, and refused to go near the living room. But then the whispers started echoing through the walls. Every room, every corner. I finally confronted it. The doll sat in the center of the living room floor. The miniature replica lay beside it. I approached cautiously. It didn't move at first. Then, in one swift motion, it rose to full height, impossibly tall, limbs elongating unnaturally. Its cracked smile stretched even wider, revealing tiny porcelain teeth. The whispers merged into a single voice. Emily, play or stay forever. I bolted, grabbing my coat. The doll followed, gliding through the house, doors and walls irrelevant. I ran into the snow, screaming, leaving everything behind. When my parents woke, the house looked normal. No dolls, no scratches, no whispering. But the small note remained on the doorstep. See you next year. To this day, every Christmas, I find a new doll waiting for me somewhere in my home. Its eyes follow me, its tiny replicas appear first, and the whispers resume. I've moved houses twice, but it always finds me. My family thinks I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. But one thing I know for sure, this Christmas, that doll will return. And next year, it will bring more of them. I've learned not to touch them, not to speak to them, not to blink. Just survive until morning. And somewhere deep inside me, I know it's waiting, patient as ever, with its porcelain smile stretching wider than reality allows. I still sleep with one eye open every Christmas Eve. My name is Mark, and this happened a few years ago during my college years. I had just returned to my parents' countryside home for the Christmas break. The snow lay thick over the hills, and the wind howled through the barren trees like an ancient warning. My parents were busy preparing dinner, and the house was quiet aside from the crackling fireplace. It was late evening when I heard it, a soft knock on the front door. Strange, I thought, since nobody usually visited this far out in the country during a snowstorm. I opened the door to see no one. Only the empty, snow-covered path stretched into the dark woods. Shrugging it off, I closed the door. assuming someone had been playing a prank. Then I heard it again. Knock, knock. Softer this time, but closer, like someone was inside the house. I froze, heart racing. I called out, "Hello?" But no one replied. The wind whistled, masking any possible sounds, yet something felt off. When I turned, I saw him. A figure, standing silently in the hallway, his face hidden beneath the hood of a long, dark coat. He didn't move, didn't breathe audibly, but his presence was suffocating. I could feel eyes burning into me, though I couldn't see them. Before I could react, he raised a hand and gestured toward the living room. A silent command I couldn't ignore. My parents were still upstairs, unaware. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs refused to obey. And then, the figure vanished. I spent the next few minutes frozen in the living room, my pulse hammering in my ears. The fire crackled, throwing long, jittering shadows across the walls. I tried convincing myself it was my imagination, a trick of the storm outside. But the cold sweat on my neck told a different story. The front door had been locked, I was sure of it. Yet I could still feel him, the presence lingering at the edge of my vision. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle behind me, almost like footsteps on the carpet. I spun around, but again, nothing. The house was silent except for the wind and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. I noticed the faint outline of footprints leading from the doorway toward the staircase. Though the snow outside hadn't been disturbed, they were too small, too precise, and somehow not human. A sense of dread crawled over me. My parents' laughter upstairs seemed distant, unreal, like it belonged to another life. I debated running, calling for them, or even throwing a chair at the empty hallway. But before I could act, a low, almost imperceptible whisper brushed past my ear. "Mark." I froze again. The name was my own, spoken with a cold intimacy that made my stomach twist. Whoever or whatever was here knew me. And it wasn't friendly. I decided I couldn't stay in the living room. I backed toward the staircase, hands trembling, trying to summon courage. As I reached the base of the stairs, I glanced into the hallway once more. There he stood again, hooded, silent, unmoving, but somehow closer than before. My breath caught. I thought about calling out to my parents, but my voice failed me. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its mere presence was command enough. I noticed something strange about its stance. The feet didn't touch the floor properly, almost as if it was hovering slightly above the carpet. I ran up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door shut behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for air. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. The whisper returned, softer this time, but unmistakable. "You can't hide." I peered through the crack in my door. Nothing. The hallway was empty, and yet the faintest shadow flickered near the bottom of the stairs, moving against the light of the staircase lamp, almost like it had slipped through the walls. I knew I wasn't safe, not even in my own room. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. I stayed crouched on the floor, clutching my blanket, listening to every creak and whisper. Every now and then, I thought I heard soft footsteps on the roof or the wind moving unnaturally, as if carrying a presence along with it. At some point, I heard faint, deliberate knocking on my bedroom window. My heart jumped into my throat. I peered through the blinds. Nothing. Just the snow and darkness. Then, almost instantly, a pale handprint appeared on the glass. Too small to belong to any adult, too delicate to be human, yet unmistakable. I stumbled back, shaking. The whisper returned, closer this time, more insistent. Come downstairs." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to shut it out. But the sound was inside my head now, not outside. Finally, summoning what little courage I had left, I grabbed the baseball bat under my bed. I told myself I could face him, chase him out, or at least survive the night. But I had no idea what I was truly dealing with. I tried to stay awake, eyes wide, but exhaustion finally claimed me. When I awoke, the room was silent. Too silent. Sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, painting the room in a deceptive calm. I sighed in relief, thinking the nightmarish figure had gone. Then I noticed it. A single black boot print on my bedroom floor, pointing toward the hallway. The footprints were small but unmistakable, and I could see faint smudges of snow around the edges. My stomach turned. The door was still closed and locked from the inside. I ran to my parents' room. They were still asleep. Nothing seemed disturbed, and yet I knew. I knew the hooded figure had been in my room, watching, waiting. I spent the rest of the day nervously checking every corner, every closet, every shadow. Nothing moved, for now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he would return that night when darkness fell, with a snowstorm carrying him inside again. Night fell again, heavier than the first. The snowstorm outside raged, hammering the windows with ice and wind. I tried to sleep in my room, but the bed felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed alive. At exactly midnight, the soft knock returned. Tap, 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 this time from the bedroom door. My pulse spiked. I held the baseball bat tighter, whispering to myself that it couldn't be real, that it had been a trick of my mind. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and then silence. I strained my ears. That's when I heard the whisper, my name, again. Only now it was closer, more intimate, like it was right beside me. The bed shifted slightly under unseen weight. I froze, unable to move or scream. Slowly, the door creaked open, though the storm outside should have kept it shut. A shadow stretched across the room, impossible and inhuman. The figure was taller than before, its hooded head tilting slightly, silent, watching. I realized with sinking dread that this wasn't just a visitor. It was a predator, patient and calculating. I tried to escape, but my legs refused. The figure glided toward me, its movements unnervingly smooth. When it reached the bed, I heard a faint shuffle, and the softest, cruelest laugh brushed my ears. My entire body shook. I realized one thing. There was no way to reason with this. No way to run. I backed against the wall, hoping for some miracle, some rational explanation. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence filled the room entirely, suffocating and oppressive. Then I noticed a small, almost invisible object at the foot of the bed. A tiny black doll, made to look like me. Its eyes glimmered with an unnatural light, and I realized that, somehow, this entity could replicate me. The whispers returned, now multiple voices, overlapping, sinister. "You can't leave. You belong here. Forever." My stomach churned. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Every attempt to move was met with an invisible force, as if the air itself had turned to chains. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Frost formed along the windows, spiraling inward like icy fingers. The shadow shifted, almost smiling beneath the hood. Then, just as abruptly, it vanished from the room. I stood frozen, heart pounding, convinced it had left. But when I glanced down at the miniature doll, it blinked. Not painted eyes, real blinking, real life in the porcelain face. I realized this wasn't just a visitor. This thing could watch me, mimic me, and torment me endlessly. The rest of the night was endless. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow felt alive. I stayed on the bed, clutching the bat like a lifeline. Occasionally, I would hear soft footsteps gliding across the ceiling, the floor, the walls, everywhere at once. Sleep was impossible. At dawn, the storm began to abate. Sunlight barely pierced the heavy clouds, casting a pale glow through the bedroom window. I thought I was safe. Then I noticed footprints in the snow outside the house, small, precise, leading directly to the front door and stopping midair, as if the figure had flown. I searched the entire house. Nothing. The dolls, the shadows, the whispering, gone. But on the living room floor, etched into the wood, were tiny letters carved deep into the surface. See you next Christmas. I realized that this entity didn't need to speak. Its presence, its movements, its shadows, every little detail left a mark, a message. It was patient. It waited for the next Christmas. And that thought alone made me tremble uncontrollably. Because deep down, I knew. There was no escaping it. The following years, every Christmas, the snowstorm would bring back the fear. No matter where I lived or how far I ran, there would always be subtle signs, a flickering light, a shadow too still, a small doll placed in an impossible location. Each time, it reminded me that the silent guest was patient and persistent. Once, I found a doll in my car, sitting in the passenger seat, smiling with impossibly real eyes. Another year, I awoke to find the figure's shadow stretching across my bedroom wall, though there was no one there. It was as if the entity could appear anywhere, anytime, as long as it wanted. My friends tried to convince me it was paranoia. My parents thought I imagined it. But I knew better. Every Christmas carried its invisible threat, and every snowstorm was a countdown to the night it would return. I started keeping a journal, documenting the appearances, the whispers, the dolls. But even writing about it was terrifying. The entity seemed to read everything, waiting for the perfect moment to escalate its torment. Now, years later, I live far away from that countryside home. I have a family, a job, a life I try to protect. But every Christmas, without fail, the memories return. And sometimes I find a small black doll on my doorstep, or a faint shadow in the corner of a room, silent, hooded, watching. I've learned not to speak its name aloud, not to make sudden movements when it appears. I simply survive. Because this entity isn't human. It doesn't follow logic. It only waits. Waits for Christmas, waits for snow, waits for the fear it thrives on. And one thing is certain, the silent guest is still patient. And next year, when the wind howls and the snow falls, I know it will come back, waiting, watching, smiling. And I will be forced to face it again. Every Christmas, I survive, but I never escape. My name is Laura, and this happened the Christmas after my 18th birthday. I had just moved into my first apartment alone, excited to decorate and celebrate without my parents hovering. The snow had started falling that evening, soft and silent, covering the streets in a thick, white blanket. I spent hours untangling strings of Christmas lights, placing them carefully along my windows and balcony, admiring how they twinkled in the darkness. Everything was normal until I noticed it. A faint glow flickering in the corner of the living room that didn't belong to any lights I had plugged in. I thought it might be a reflection or a neighbor's decoration. But as I moved closer, the glow seemed to follow me, like it had a mind of its own. A shiver ran down my spine, but I told myself it was silly. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft and almost mechanical, like the buzzing of electricity. Laura. It wasn't my imagination. The lights along the window pulsed in rhythm with the whisper, as if they were trying to communicate. My hands trembled, the plug slipping from my fingers. Something about the lights was watching me. I stepped back, heart racing, trying to rationalize it. Then, the lights went dark. And when they came back on, they weren't twinkling anymore. They were glowing steadily, pointed, like tiny eyes staring at me from every window. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, the reflection, or a loose wire. But the feeling of being watched intensified. Every time I turned my back, I caught the lights in my peripheral vision moving slightly, forming shapes that weren't there before. Shapes that looked like shadows, silhouettes, human figures frozen in the glow. I attempted to disconnect the lights entirely. As I pulled the plug, I heard a faint clicking sound, like hundreds of tiny cameras snapping in unison. My stomach churned. The lights on the opposite side of the room flickered back on immediately, brighter this time, casting harsh shadows that danced along the walls. I could see now that they weren't ordinary lights. Each bulb pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. And then I noticed movement inside the bulbs. Tiny faces, distorted and watching, peering back at me with hollow eyes. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The whispering returned, louder now, insistent. "Why do you hide, Laura?" My mind screamed to run, to leave the apartment, but my body refused. The lights along the balcony twitched, as if signaling me to step closer. Desperation took over. I grabbed a blanket and covered the lights, hoping that would stop whatever was happening. But the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to come from inside the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered violently, revealing dozens of shadowy figures standing just outside my windows. I froze. Their faces were obscured, but I could feel their eyes. Hundreds of tiny pinpricks of light, each reflecting something malevolent. My phone was in my pocket, but the moment I tried to grab it, it slipped from my hands, rolling across the floor and landed upright, the screen showing dozens of tiny reflections staring back at me. I realized then that it wasn't just the lights. Whatever these figures were, they could move through electricity, through light, through any device capable of glowing. My apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a cage. I backed into the kitchen, trying to find something to defend myself. My thoughts raced. Could I smash the bulbs? Pull out the wiring? Anything. But the figures outside the windows began tapping on the glass. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. I grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it like a lifeline. My hands shook uncontrollably. The tapping on the window intensified, turning into scratches, almost as if someone, or something, was trying to get inside. I couldn't call anyone. The electricity flickered, and my phone screen now displayed dozens of tiny, glowing eyes inside it. I realized this wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't a prank. This entity had merged with the lights, with the electricity itself. Every device, every flicker, every glow was now part of its domain. My only chance was to escape without touching any of the lights. I slowly moved toward the front door, stepping carefully to avoid the floor lamps and decorations. Every movement made the lights pulse faster, brighter. The whispers became unintelligible voices, overlapping, calling my name over and over. Finally, I reached the door. I swung it open and ran out into the snowstorm. For a moment, I felt free. The cold air burned my lungs, the wind whipped my face, and the snow swallowed the apartment behind me. But when I glanced back, all the windows were glowing again, and the shadows were gone. For now, I never returned to that apartment. I stayed with friends for the rest of the holiday season, but the nightmares followed me. Every time I saw Christmas lights, even from a distance, they seemed to watch, flicker, and whisper. Months later, I moved into a new place, and at first, everything was normal. Then, one evening, the streetlights outside started flickering in rhythm with my heartbeat. I heard faint tapping on my windows, soft whispers of my name, and in every reflection from a screen, a window, or a shiny surface, I could see tiny eyes staring back at me, glowing like the lights that had almost driven me insane. I realized then, this entity doesn't rest, it doesn't sleep. It waits, hiding in every source of light, silently watching, learning. And every Christmas, it remembers me. No matter where I go, the lights always watch. The next Christmas approached, and I thought I had left the terror behind. I had decorated my new apartment with care, avoiding the mistakes of the past. But the moment I plugged in the small string of lights above my windows, a familiar flicker danced across the bulbs. My stomach sank. The whisper returned, faint at first, then insistent. "Laura, we see you?" I tried to unplug the lights, but the cord seemed fused with electricity, glowing faintly despite being disconnected. Panic rose in my chest. The reflections in the window weren't just shapes anymore. They had faces, twisted, smiling, watching. Every blink, every shadow in the room seemed alive. I realized the entity had followed me, merging with light itself. As I backed away, my eyes caught movement in the ceiling lamp. A shadow hovered, flickering, stretching unnaturally, morphing into figures I couldn't describe. I could hear hundreds of whispers overlapping now, calling my name in tones that pierced my mind. I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the window, shattering part of the glass. The lights dimmed for a moment, but the shadows only shifted. They were learning. They adapted. And I was the prey. I understood then. This wasn't something I could escape. It didn't need doors or walls. It was everywhere the light touched, waiting for me to falter. I retreated to the bathroom, locking the door and pressing myself against the cold tiles. The lights in the hallway flickered violently, and the whispers became shrieks. My reflection in the mirror seemed wrong. The eyes staring back weren't mine. They were hollow, glowing faintly, mimicking the expressions I made. The tiny string of lights above the mirror began to twitch, moving as if alive. Shadows poured out from them, coalescing into humanoid shapes, limbs twisting in impossible angles. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the room. The mirror pulsed with a heartbeat, each flicker synchronized with my fear. I realized the entity could not only watch me through reflections, but also manipulate them, reaching through the glass with unseen fingers. I grabbed a towel and threw it over the lights, hoping to block whatever connection existed. For a brief second, the room went dark. Silence, relief. Then, a single light bulb at the far end of the hall flickered back on. Inside it, a tiny figure mimicked my terrified stance. I knew then that this wasn't over. The entity had not just returned, it had learned. It had adapted, and it was ready to escalate. I had no choice but to flee. Clutching my coat and keys, I darted out of the apartment. Outside, the streetlights flickered erratically, illuminating hundreds of glowing eyes in every reflective surface. Windows, parked cars, even puddles on the icy sidewalk. The entity had extended its reach beyond my apartment. I ran to the corner store for help, but every device inside, cash register screens, neon signs, and security cameras, glowed with the same malevolent intelligence. Even the fluorescent lights pulsed in rhythm with the whispers that had become deafening. I realized that wherever electricity flowed, it could see me. There was no safe place, no sanctuary. Each shadow, each reflection was alive, studying me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to call the police, but my phone displayed hundreds of tiny faces, distorted, all staring back at me, their eyes glowing like the lights that had haunted me before. I understood then that this entity thrived on observation. It didn't need to touch me to hurt me. It only needed me to know it was watching. And it would never stop. I spent the rest of the night in an all-night diner, hiding under dim lights that were not connected to the grid, unplugged, isolated. But even there, the whispers persisted. I could feel tiny pricks of light from the old neon sign above, pulsing like a heartbeat, forming patterns, faces staring at me. The waitress tried to reassure me, but I could see it now. Her eyes flickered unnaturally, even in the dim lighting. I had no idea if she was real or another projection of the entity. I stayed frozen in a booth, terrified to blink, knowing that the moment I did, something unseen would advance. I wrote down everything I remembered: the shapes, the whispers, the tiny eyes in every bulb. I had to track patterns, clues, weaknesses. The entity learned quickly, and I had no idea how long it had been observing me. Every Christmas, every flicker of light could be a doorway for it to return. By dawn, exhaustion overtook me, but sleep was impossible. I realized the truth. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't rest. It only watches. Always watching. Years later, I've learned to live cautiously. I avoid all decorative lights during Christmas, unplug electronics whenever possible, and never stay alone in the dark. But sometimes, at night, I see a faint glow reflected from distant windows, or the tiniest flicker in a passing car, and I know it's still there, patient and aware. I've begun seeing the faces in screens everywhere: phones, TVs, monitors, and the whispers return in my mind. Every Christmas, it reminds me that nothing I do can hide me from it. The lights always watch. They always wait. And one day, I fear, they will step out of the glow completely. Even now, as I speak these words, I can feel the faintest pulse of light brushing against me, reminding me that this entity hasn't forgotten. It never will. And every time the glow flickers, I remember it sees me. My name is Ethan, and this happened during my first Christmas living alone in the city. I had spent weeks decorating my small apartment, stringing lights across the walls and placing ornaments on the tiny tree I'd bought at a local market. One ornament, in particular, caught my eye: a delicate glass bauble with a reflective surface so perfect it almost seemed to hold a tiny world inside. I hung it in the center of the tree, admiring how it caught the light from the stringed bulbs. That night, I woke to the sound of faint whispers. At first, I thought it was the apartment settling or the wind outside. But then I heard it clearly. My name, Ethan. Soft, breathy, coming from the direction of the tree. Heart hammering, I approached cautiously. The bauble swung slightly, though there was no draft. Its reflective surface shimmered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I saw my own face inside it, distorted, watching me with fear I didn't feel yet. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was my imagination after a long day of decorating. Then I heard a soft tap against the glass, like fingernails tracing the surface from inside. The whisper repeated, this time with an edge of malice. Ethan, look closer. My pulse raced. Something about the ornament was alive, aware, and it knew my name. I stepped back, trying to shake the feeling of unease. The bauble now seemed to pulse faintly, a subtle glow emanating from its core. Every time I blinked, it appeared to move slightly, turning to face me no matter my position in the room. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, urgent and insistent. I reached for the ornament, thinking I could remove it and end the terror. The moment my fingers touched the smooth glass, a chill ran through me. The temperature around me dropped suddenly, frosting forming on the edges of the windows, even though the heat was on. Inside the bauble, I could now see another version of my apartment, a twisted replica, and in it, a dark shadow crouched, its face a grotesque mockery of my own. Panicked, I tried to throw the ornament to the floor, but it seemed weightless, floating in midair for a moment before it clattered to the carpet. Even then, the whispers persisted, echoing through the room, calling my name repeatedly. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and I realized something impossible. The ornament wasn't just watching. It was learning. Knowing every fear I had, I tried to convince myself to leave it alone until morning, hoping that daylight would strip the ornament of whatever power it held. But every shadow in the room seemed alive, stretching unnaturally toward the tree. I could hear faint scraping sounds from the walls, whispers threading through every corner, urging me closer. Look, closer, see. The bauble began to glow more intensely, throwing fractured reflections across the ceiling. Then I noticed them, tiny silhouettes, almost imperceptible, moving inside the glass. Figures crouched, shifted, and watched, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and malice. And with each movement, a new whisper reached my ears. "Ethan, you belong." I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The noise seemed to anger whatever was in the ornament. The glass pulsed violently, vibrating in my hand, and I could feel something tugging at my mind, as if trying to pull me into that miniature, distorted world inside the bauble. I realized that this was no ordinary decoration. It wasn't haunted. It was sentient. It had a purpose, and its first goal was clear: to claim me. I grabbed a blanket and tried to smother the bauble, but the glow penetrated the fabric as though it were transparent. Panic overtook me. I considered throwing the tree out the window, but the apartment felt suddenly trapped, smaller than before, with walls bending slightly, reflections warping around me. The whispers became a chorus, all chanting my name in a distorted rhythm, echoing in my skull. The faces inside the ornament grew larger, closer, some pressing against the inner glass, screaming silently. I could feel my own reflection stretching unnaturally, twisted into expressions of horror I didn't recognize. The air grew heavy, thick with frost and tension. I realized I had to act. Slowly, I backed toward the door, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the cold creeping along my skin. I stepped outside into the hall, hoping to escape the apartment's influence. But even then, in the faint light of the corridor, I could see the bauble's glow following me, projected faintly in every reflective surface. It was as if it could extend itself, infecting anything shiny, anything reflective. I knew that if I didn't destroy it tonight, it would continue to haunt me, patiently waiting for the next chance to pull me into its twisted world. I spent the night in the lobby of the building, refusing to return to my apartment. Every reflective surface, from polished floors to elevator doors, held a faint, pulsing glow, whispering my name. Sleep was impossible. By morning, I realized the entity wasn't contained in the ornament anymore. It had begun to infect the environment, spreading through every surface that could reflect light. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed quickly, leaving the tree and the ornament behind. But even on the street, the reflections of shop windows, parked cars, and icy puddles flickered with faint, glowing eyes. It had learned my habits, my fears, and it was patient. One day, it would reach me again. Every Christmas since, I avoid ornaments, reflective decorations, and even brightly lit windows. But sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see a tiny shimmer, just a flash of glass, and I hear the whisper of my name. And I know, deep down, that it's waiting. For the next Christmas, I thought leaving the apartment would be enough to escape. But the moment I stepped onto the icy streets, I realized how wrong I was. Every reflective surface, from puddles to car windows, seemed to shimmer with a faint, eerie glow. My name whispered on the wind, soft at first, then growing louder, more urgent. I ducked into a convenience store, hoping to lose the sensation of being watched. But inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, and each shiny surface held glimpses of the bauble's miniature world. Faces pressed against invisible glass, twisting in silent screams. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that the stress and fear had warped reality. But then, the bauble's reflection appeared on the counter in front of me, glowing softly. The tiny figures moved, shifting closer to me with deliberate, patient intent. Panic surged. I understood now that the ornament had expanded its reach, infecting any surface that reflected light. It didn't need to be near me physically. It could find me anywhere light could travel. The whispers intensified. Ethan, closer, closer. I knew one misstep could allow it to pull me fully into its twisted world. I had no plan, no safe haven. All I could do was keep moving and hope it didn't corner me. I fled to a nearby diner, desperate for refuge. The neon sign outside cast a dim red glow, but even that seemed tainted. Inside, every chrome surface, tables, coffee machines, mirrors, shimmered with faint, malevolent light. The whispers followed me relentlessly, repeating my name, mocking me. I realized that even daylight or artificial lighting wasn't safe. The ornament's influence had grown. I could see tiny faces peering at me from every reflection, their expressions twisted with hunger and anticipation. One figure, in particular, mirrored my every movement perfectly, but with a grotesque grin I didn't recognize. I hid in a booth, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The glow in the reflections seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. It was learning me, studying my fear and waiting for the moment when I would falter. Every flicker of light was a warning, every whisper a lure. I understood then that the ornament was intelligent, patient, and cruel, and no matter how far I ran, it could reach me wherever light existed. The thought chilled me more than the cold ever could. Hours passed, and I stayed in the diner, too terrified to move. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken and stretch unnaturally, as if reaching for me. Every surface continued to shimmer with the ornament's influence, making it impossible to escape visually. I considered calling someone for help, but my phone displayed hundreds of tiny, glowing faces instead of a screen. They pressed against the glass, staring at me with hollow eyes. I dropped it immediately, unable to bear the sight. The whispers escalated into a chorus, chanting my name in an eerie rhythm. I realized the ornament wasn't just a reflection of fear, it fed on it, growing stronger the more terrified I became. My mind raced, trying to find a way to fight back, to destroy it before it fully consumed me. Then, a single thought hit me. Perhaps light itself was its weakness. If I could isolate the ornament from all sources of illumination, maybe I could contain it, trap it, and end the torment. But the risk was enormous. One mistake could trap me inside its world forever. I devised a plan. I returned to my apartment at night, armed with blackout curtains, blankets, and courage fueled by desperation. Every step felt like walking through a nightmare. The reflective surfaces seemed to pulse with awareness, whispering my name with increasing urgency. Inside, I covered every mirror, unplugged every device, and wrapped the tree with blankets. The ornament hung at the center, glowing faintly through the layers. I could see movement inside it, the twisted miniature figures pressing toward the glass. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I pressed onward, determined to isolate it from light completely. Finally, I dragged the tree and ornament into the bathtub, covering it with heavy blankets and closing the blinds. The whispers became frantic, screaming now in fury. For hours, I waited, heart pounding, listening. The glowing inside the ornament flickered violently, then dimmed, until all was silent. I didn't sleep that night, but for the first time, the apartment felt safe. Christmas passed, and I began to rebuild my life, cautiously decorating with non-reflective items. I never touched a glass ornament again. But sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see a faint shimmer, a glint of reflection that shouldn't be there. And every time I notice it, I hear a soft whisper. Ethan, next year. I've learned a terrifying truth. The ornament isn't destroyed. It isn't gone. It waits patiently in darkness, in every reflection, learning, observing, biding its time. Every year when the lights come on, I remember that fragile, sentient bauble. And I know that one day, if I'm not careful, it will step out of its glass prison and claim me entirely. No Christmas, no matter how bright, will ever feel safe again. My name is Rachel, and this happened during the Christmas before last. I had moved into an old Victorian house with my fiancé, hoping for a cozy holiday in a home full of character. The house had creaking floors, drafty windows, and an attic that had been locked for years. Everyone said it was just old, nothing to worry about. But the first night I hung our stockings, I heard faint thumps above my head. Rhythmic, deliberate, almost like footsteps in heavy boots. At first, I thought it was rats or the house settling. But then I heard a low, gravelly laugh echoing down the hallway. It wasn't cheerful. It was harsh, deliberate, and chilling. Ho, 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 it said, distorted, as though from someone or something, mimicking Santa Claus. Curious and unnerved, I found the attic door. It was unlocked now, though we had never touched it. I hesitated, listening. The air from inside was cold, musty, and carried the faint scent of pine and something far more sinister. Decay. I knew instinctively that the noise and the laughter weren't coming from anywhere else. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the old roof beams sounded like it was calling me up there. And deep down, I feared the truth. Someone, or something, was waiting in the attic, watching Christmas unfold below. The following evening, I decided I had to see what was up there. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase, every step groaning beneath my weight. The attic was a cavernous, dust-choked space filled with forgotten furniture, cobwebs, and old holiday decorations. Boxes labeled Christmas lined the walls. But something about them felt wrong, too orderly, too deliberate. As I moved deeper into the attic, the faint sound of jingling bells started. Not cheerful bells, but discordant, uneven tones, like something dragging its feet across the wooden floor. My flashlight flickered, and I caught a shadow moving at the edge of the beam. Then I saw it. A figure in a faded Santa suit, slouched in the corner, head tilted unnaturally. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to notice it. I froze, heart hammering. The figure whispered my name softly, as though testing me. "Rachel, come closer." Panic surged, and I stumbled backward. The figure didn't move physically, but its presence pressed against me like a force. I realized that the attic wasn't just a storage space, it was a lair, and the being within it had existed long before we arrived, unseen, studying the house and its occupants. Over the next few nights, the sounds escalated. The jingling of boots, the scraping of furniture, and that low, distorted laughter echoed through the house. At first, I thought I could ignore it, dismiss it as imagination. But the footprints appeared. Tiny, dusty prints leading from the attic stairs to the hallway below, then vanishing in thin air. One night, I awoke to a cold breath on my neck. Turning quickly, I saw a shadowy silhouette at the doorway, the hat of the Santa suit just visible above the wall. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but the air seemed thick with malice. Desperate, I tried recording the noises on my phone, hoping to capture evidence. The recording was distorted, filled with whispers and static, but through it, I distinctly heard my own name repeated over and over. The attic entity wasn't just observing, it was communicating with me, marking me. By the third night, I refused to go near the attic. But the entity was clever. Every day, objects near the stairs shifted, boxes slightly open, old ornaments scattered on the floor, and the faintest trace of soot in a perfect Santa hat shape. I knew it was toying with me, learning my limits, preparing for something, preparing. On Christmas Eve, the terror peaked. I was decorating the living room when I heard heavy thumping from above, followed by dragging noises, then a slow, guttural voice whispering, "It's time." I froze, knowing the entity had decided tonight was its moment. I grabbed a chair and climbed the attic stairs cautiously. Each step groaned under my weight, echoing through the cavernous space. The Santa figure was gone from the corner, but something else had changed. The shadows on the walls began to twist unnaturally, forming shapes that mimicked my movements. The air smelled of burnt pine and something far more sinister, like iron and decay. Then I saw it. The figure perched on a beam above, smiling with a face pale and stretched, eyes black voids that seemed to pierce my soul. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was descending, moving toward me through the shadows without touching the floor. I stumbled backward, tripping over old boxes. The figure let out that low, gravelly laughter, echoing like it had multiple throats. My heart raced, and I realized there was no escaping this entity in the attic. It had been waiting, and now I was trapped in its domain. I screamed, trying to fight, throwing anything I could grab. The figure moved faster than I could track, leaping from beam to beam, its laughter echoing, each note like a whip cracking in my mind. I backed into a corner, shivering as the entity's gaze bore into me. Then something unexpected happened. A small, old-fashioned lantern sat in a forgotten corner, lit by some unseen hand. Its warm glow seemed to repel the figure slightly, forcing it into the darker shadows. I realized that light was its weakness, or at least it disliked it. Clutching the lantern, I forced the entity back, slowly inching toward the attic door. With one final, desperate push, I stumbled down the stairs and slammed the door behind me. The thumping and laughter ceased immediately. I didn't sleep that night, but I had survived. I learned the attic had been home to something older than the house itself. A dark presence that took the form of Santa to lure the curious. And I knew one truth. Next Christmas, it would be waiting. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was over. But as night fell, unease returned. Every shadow in the house seemed to stretch unnaturally, and the faintest creak of the attic door sent a shiver down my spine. I avoided the staircase entirely, but the heavy thumping returned, this time accompanied by a slow, deliberate scratching as if claws dragged across the wooden floor above. I sat in the living room, clutching a blanket, and noticed something impossible. The ornaments on the lower shelves were now subtly arranged in patterns I hadn't made. Tiny figurines facing me, candles tilted toward me, and the faint outline of a Santa hat drawn in the dust. The entity was sending a message, asserting control over my environment, letting me know it hadn't been defeated. The whispers began again, soft at first, then louder, as if guiding me toward something in the dark. "Rachel, come. Closer." My fear became tangible, pressing against me like a physical force. I realized the attic wasn't just a hiding place. It was a gateway, and it wanted me inside. Determined to confront it, I returned to the attic armed with a flashlight and courage fueled by desperation. The moment I opened the door, the air hit me like a wall of cold, thick and musty. The attic had transformed. The shadows had deepened, twisting around old furniture and boxes. The Santa figure was perched on a beam, but now it moved with unnatural speed, its black eyes following every step. The discordant jingling of its boots echoed through the space, creating a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. I tried to speak, to ask it why, but no words came out. Then it began to descend, crawling along the rafters with fluid, impossible motions. Its presence pressed into my mind, whispering every fear I had ever held. I realized it didn't need to touch me physically. The attic itself was a conduit for its influence. I shone the flashlight directly on it, trying to force it into the light. The figure hissed, recoiling, its shadowy limbs stretching as if trying to escape exposure. For the first time, I felt a small surge of hope. Light was its weakness. The entity hissed and writhed as I shone the light, but it didn't vanish. Instead, it began splitting into multiple smaller shadows, creeping along every surface, every corner of the attic. Panic surged. I realized isolating it was impossible. It had spread, infecting the space itself. I grabbed a heavy blanket and threw it over the main figure, hoping to contain it. The shadows pressed against the fabric, struggling to escape, whispering in my mind. "You cannot stop me." "Next year," I screamed, feeling my sanity fray. Then I remembered the old trunk at the back of the attic, the one labeled "Christmas decorations do not open." Something compelled me toward it. Inside, hidden under layers of tattered cloth, was an old, charred book, its cover embossed with symbols I didn't recognize. Flipping through, I found instructions, rituals designed to bind malevolent holiday spirits. It was my only chance. I had to perform the ritual tonight or be consumed by the entity completely. With trembling hands, I followed the instructions in the book. Candles arranged, protective circles drawn, and words spoken aloud in a voice I barely recognized as mine. The shadows shrieked, twisting violently, as if the attic itself was alive and fighting back. The Santa figure lunged toward me, black void eyes wide, but the ritual created a barrier. I felt a tug on my soul, a force trying to pull me into the darkness. Sweat poured down my face, heart racing. I repeated the incantation louder, every syllable a lifeline. The shadows recoiled, writhing, and the attic seemed to shudder. With a final, defiant scream, the entity was drawn back into the blanket and trapped within the trunk. The whispers ceased abruptly, leaving a ringing silence. I collapsed, exhausted but alive. For the first time in days, I felt the warmth of safety. The attic was silent. The entity's influence seemed dormant, contained. For now, Christmas morning came, silent and cold. The house felt normal again, but I couldn't shake the sense of dread. I locked the trunk in the attic and covered it with heavy tarps, knowing the entity was still there, trapped but patient. Every Christmas since, I avoid the attic entirely. But sometimes, when I pass the staircase, I hear faint jingles, almost like distant laughter. I know it hasn't left. It waits, biding its time, a malevolent force ready to return when the conditions are right. Every shadow, every reflection of light on the walls reminds me that the Santa in the attic is still alive, and it remembers me. And I know that next Christmas, it will try again. No matter how festive the season, I can never forget the horror lurking above, silently watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim. My name is Daniel, and this happened one snowy Christmas Eve when I was 27. I had just moved into my first apartment, excited to celebrate alone for the first time in years. The city was quiet, and the snowfall outside painted the streets in soft white. I was expecting solitude, maybe a little holiday cheer, when a knock at my door startled me. No one was supposed to visit. I opened the door to find a small, neatly wrapped box with a bright red ribbon. No note, no name. My curiosity mixed with unease. I brought it inside, shaking slightly, the faintest sense of dread prickling at the back of my neck. When I lifted the lid, the gift revealed a small, intricately carved wooden figure, a child holding a lantern. At first, it seemed innocent, even charming. But then I noticed the eyes. They were eerily detailed, almost lifelike, and they seemed to be watching me. My stomach twisted. A whisper escaped the figure's tiny mouth, so soft I thought I imagined it. Daniel. My heart froze. No one could know my name. I hadn't told anyone about this secluded apartment, and yet this object called me out. I knew instinctively that this gift was not a present at all. It was a warning, or worse, an invitation into something I could not yet understand. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired or imagining things. I placed the figure on the mantel, under the soft glow of my Christmas lights. But as night fell, I began to notice subtle changes. The figure was no longer facing forward. It had turned, ever so slightly, to watch me. I sat on the couch, pretending to read, but I couldn't focus. The carved eyes seemed to follow my every movement, and the lantern it held flickered faintly, though it had no source of light. A cold draft whispered across the room, though every window and door was tightly shut. I reached out, half expecting the figure to react. My fingers hovered above the wooden child when I heard it again. My name, whispered, this time louder, more urgent. Daniel. My pulse quickened. The room felt smaller, as though the air itself was pressing in. I realized with a sickening certainty that the figure knew things about me, things no stranger could possibly know. And it wasn't just aware, it was intelligent, watching, learning, waiting for the right moment. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a creepy antique or clever craftsmanship. But the whispers grew persistent, echoing through the apartment even when I left the room. I started noticing signs. My personal belongings subtly rearranged, objects I had left on the counter now on the floor, and the faintest scratches etched into the wood of my furniture. The carved figure's face seemed to change in subtle ways. Some nights it smiled slightly. Other nights, its eyes widened as though horrified. And every time, my name was whispered. Not only did it know me, it seemed to anticipate my reactions, testing my fear. I began to feel watched constantly. Even in the kitchen, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing there in its tiny wooden body, somehow larger than it should be. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow, every flicker of light made me jump. By the third night, I understood that this was no ordinary Christmas gift. It was a sentient object, intimately aware of my life, and it was toying with me. Determined to understand it, I began researching the figure. Online forums, antique shops, obscure books on cursed objects. I scoured every source I could find. What I learned chilled me to the bone. Objects like this, crafted long ago, were said to absorb knowledge about their owners, feeding on fear and uncertainty before manifesting physical influence over their lives. One entry mentioned that such a figure could even manipulate reality subtly, causing accidents, misplacements, and hallucinations, all to weaken the mind of its owner. The warning was clear. The more terrified you became, the more powerful it grew. That night, I awoke to the sound of my own voice. I wasn't speaking, but I heard myself call. "Daniel, help me." The words came from nowhere, yet sounded like my own breath. The carved figure sat at the center of my room, its tiny lantern flickering with impossible intensity. I realized there was no ignoring it. It would not stop. It knew everything about me, and it would wait until I was completely vulnerable before taking its final step. Terrified, I tried moving the figure. I wrapped it carefully in cloth, locked it in a box, and carried it to the closet. But every morning, without fail, it reappeared on the mantel, perfectly positioned, staring at me. It had learned my habits, my weaknesses, my roots, and no barrier could contain it. The whispers became more urgent, speaking not only my name, but secrets from my past. Things I had never told anyone. Memories of guilt, fear, and shame were now weaponized against me, making me feel exposed, hunted, and powerless. I understood that the figure's intelligence wasn't limited to observation. It manipulated emotions, amplified anxiety, and turned my own mind into a prison. I was trapped in my own home, haunted by a Christmas gift that had far too much knowledge of me and far too much patience. I didn't know how to end it, how to escape it. But I knew one thing with certainty. This Christmas, the gift wasn't just watching. It was preparing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the apartment felt alive, shifting unnaturally whenever I blinked. The carved figure glowed faintly from the mantel, and I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, like multiple voices speaking at once, each revealing intimate details of my life. Desperate, I tried to leave the apartment, but as I opened the door, I froze. Snow was falling outside, but the streets were eerily empty. And then I saw it. Tiny footprints leading from my door to the sidewalk, far too small to be human, yet somehow perfectly detailed. The figure was not bound by its wooden form. It moved in ways I couldn't comprehend. Panicked, I backed inside. The moment I shut the door, the whispers ceased. But the air still felt heavy, pressing down on me. The gift had extended its influence beyond the apartment, testing boundaries. I realized then that it wasn't just an object. It was intelligent, patient, and calculating. And it had chosen me. I spent the next hours frantically researching how to destroy cursed objects. But everything I found was vague. Some suggested fire, others water. But each warned that failure would make the entity stronger. I had no choice. I had to act. I gathered candles, salt, and a small hammer. As I approached the figure, it seemed to shift subtly, turning its head in anticipation. Its eyes glimmered with intelligence, almost mocking me. I raised the hammer, trembling, but just before striking, the whispers intensified, filling my mind with all the mistakes I had ever made, all my fears, all my regrets. I paused, nearly frozen by terror. My hands shook violently, my heart racing. Then I realized this was what it wanted, to break me mentally before it destroyed me physically. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slammed the hammer down. The figure splintered, tiny shards of wood scattering across the mantel. But then, the worst happened. The whispers didn't stop. Instead, they grew louder, now coming from all directions: walls, floor, ceiling. The broken fragments of the figure began to move independently, crawling across surfaces, reassembling themselves piece by piece. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor. My mind screamed, trying to comprehend the impossible. The entity wasn't destroyed, it had adapted. Its glowing eyes now stared at me from multiple directions, whispering my name, mocking me. Every attempt to control it had failed. In sheer panic, I grabbed every light source in the apartment, illuminating the room. For a moment, the entity recoiled, shadows shrinking and twisting. But it didn't vanish. I realized then that this was a battle of willpower, not brute force. The gift had become a living nightmare, feeding on fear and anticipation. I remembered one final method mentioned in an old forum. Force it into a container and seal it completely, surrounding it with protective symbols. I rushed to the closet, grabbing a heavy metal box and surrounding it with salt and candlelight. Carefully, I coaxed the figure fragments into the box. The whispers were deafening, screaming my name, promising retribution, warning me it would return. My hands bled from the shards, my body trembling uncontrollably. I closed the box, chanting protective words I barely understood. For a moment, silence. Complete silence. I sank to the floor, exhausted, unsure if it was truly contained. The apartment felt lighter, the shadows retreating. I had survived, for now. But I knew deep in my gut that the gift's intelligence had not been destroyed. It had been trapped, patient and cunning, waiting for its next opportunity. Christmas morning arrived. Snow falling softly outside, casting a deceptive serenity over the city. I sat quietly, exhausted, staring at the sealed box. The apartment felt normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Weeks later, the whispers returned, faint and almost imperceptible, reminding me that the entity was still alive, waiting, learning. I realized the horrifying truth. Some Christmas gifts are not meant to be opened, and some horrors are patient enough to wait a lifetime for the perfect moment. Now, every year when I see a neatly wrapped present, my heart tightens, because the gift that knew too much still remembers me. And one day, it may come for me again. My name is Emily, and this happened when I was 24, during my first Christmas living alone in my grandparents' old house. The house was enormous, with tall ceilings, narrow hallways, and a sense of stillness that made even ordinary creaks sound sinister. I had always loved decorating the Christmas tree, but this year felt different. I bought an unusually large pine tree from a nearby lot. Its branches were perfect, and the scent of fresh needles filled the living room. I spent hours stringing lights and hanging ornaments. When I finally stepped back to admire it, I felt a strange sensation. Like tiny eyes were observing me from among the branches. I laughed it off, assuming my imagination was running wild in the dim glow of the fairy lights. But as I turned to grab another ornament, I froze. One of the baubles, a delicate glass angel, was tilted perfectly toward me, although I was certain I hadn't touched it. My stomach twisted. The feeling intensified, a gnawing sense that the tree was not merely decorative. It was alive and aware. Then I heard it, a faint rustle from the tree like a whisper in the needles. Emily. My blood ran cold. No one else was home. I had never spoken aloud in the room, yet the tree knew my name. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the wind moving through the open windows. But then the whispers grew louder, more distinct, calling my name repeatedly, emerging from the tree itself. My heart pounded. Each time I approached the tree, I noticed subtle changes. Ornaments seemed to shift positions, lights flickered in patterns that resembled eyes, and the tree's shape appeared slightly twisted, leaning toward me as if straining to see. I realized with mounting terror that the tree was not a passive decoration. It was studying me, learning my habits, waiting for something. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded amplified, echoing like footsteps around the living room. I swore I saw movement in the tree's branches when no light touched it. I began to fear every glance toward the tree, every reflection in the window or mirror, as though it had already entered my mind. The holiday cheer that should have been comforting was gone, replaced by an oppressive awareness that I was being watched. Determined not to let fear consume me, I tried to go about my usual Christmas preparations. I baked cookies, wrapped gifts, and attempted to watch a holiday movie. Yet every time I glanced at the tree, I felt it tracking my movements, as though it could anticipate my actions. One evening, I noticed a cluster of tinsel arranged unnaturally, forming the faint outline of a face. I froze. It blinked, or at least it seemed to. The room grew colder, and a faint whisper floated through the air. Emily. This time it was accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible rustle, like the swaying of branches, but without any breeze. I realized I could no longer treat the tree as an object. It was sentient, malevolent, and aware of me. Every instinct screamed that I was no longer in control of my own home, and that the tree was patient, biding its time, waiting for a moment when I let my guard down completely. I tried to sleep with the lights on, but the faint rustling persisted, echoing through the quiet house. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the tree's branches reaching toward me, creeping slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if preparing to engulf me. I found myself avoiding the living room entirely, taking alternate routes to the bathroom, kitchen, or bedroom. Yet the tree's presence was unavoidable. It loomed in the center of my life, omnipresent, a silent sentinel. Even reflections in the mirror seemed to magnify its awareness, the glowing lights resembling countless watchful eyes. I began leaving gifts under the tree, not for anyone, but as an offering, hoping to placate whatever was alive within it. But the gifts would sometimes shift overnight, wrapped paper moved or torn slightly, as if the tree was communicating through subtle disturbances. Fear became constant, and a gnawing thought settled in my mind. The tree wasn't just observing, it was learning. And learning meant it was preparing for something I could not yet comprehend. One evening, as I trimmed the lower branches, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being touched. A branch bent toward me with impossible force, grazing my arm. I yelped and jumped back, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the whispers returned, this time layered, almost chanting, "Emily, stay. Stay with us." The temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the air. The tree's lights flickered violently, illuminating what seemed to be tiny, indistinct forms hidden among the needles, faces, figures. I couldn't tell, but they watched, unblinking. I realized the horror. This was no ordinary tree. It was feeding on me, cultivating fear and marking me as part of itself. And in that moment, I understood I couldn't destroy it with conventional means. Whatever force animated the tree was ancient, patient, and intelligent. I had to survive until Christmas morning, hoping the daylight or company would weaken its influence. But I knew, deep down, that tonight, the tree was preparing for something much worse. Night fell like a heavy curtain, and the house seemed to close in around me. I stayed in the kitchen, avoiding the living room entirely, but the whispers followed. I could hear them faintly through the walls, almost like a chorus of voices hidden in the wooden beams. Suddenly, the lights on the tree blinked in a sequence, forming a pattern that resembled a face staring straight at me. My pulse raced. I tried to look away, but my gaze was drawn inexorably back. The branches twitched, each movement deliberate, almost predatory. I realized with a sinking feeling that the tree was learning to manipulate fear, predicting my reactions. Every instinct screamed that it wanted more than observation. It wanted control. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and I clutched the edge of the counter for support, knowing deep down that I was at the mercy of something far older and cleverer than I could comprehend. I decided I had to confront it. Grabbing a broom, I stepped cautiously into the living room. The tree loomed before me, enormous and impossibly still, yet somehow aware of my every movement. The air was icy, my breath forming clouds as I approached. As I raised the broom to strike a branch, the tree reacted instantly. The lights flickered violently, shadows contorting into human-like figures among the needles. The whispers became a deafening chant, all calling my name. "Emily? Emily?" A branch lashed out, narrowly missing my face, and I stumbled back. Panic surged, but I forced myself to steady my shaking hands. This was no ordinary Christmas tree. It was alive, intelligent, and it thrived on my fear. I had to find a way to end this before it completely consumed me. I remembered a passage in an old folklore book. Trees of ancient power could be contained using mirrors and reflective surfaces, forcing them to face themselves. Desperate, I scrambled to cover the walls with mirrors, placing every reflective surface I could find around the tree. As soon as I finished, the whispers faltered, and the tree trembled violently. The lights flickered in erratic bursts, casting dozens of distorted reflections across the room. For the first time, I saw the faces within the tree clearly. Tiny, distorted, screaming human faces embedded among the branches. The horror was overwhelming, but I realized I had a chance. I took a deep breath and recited a protective incantation I had learned from the book. Slowly, the shadows began to recede, the faces shrieking and dissolving into faint mist. The tree swayed as if struggling against the invisible barrier, but it was contained. For now, morning came, and the house was eerily silent. The tree appeared normal, but I could still feel its presence, subtle and persistent, like a heartbeat in the air. I knew it was contained, but not destroyed. Over the next few days, I carefully maintained the mirrors and protective symbols. Each night, the faintest whispers returned, reminding me that it was only waiting for the next opportunity, biding its time. I called a local historian to learn more about the property and the tree's origin. He confirmed my fear. The pine had been planted decades ago on land rumored to be cursed, and stories of its sentience had circulated for generations. I was just the latest in a long line of victims chosen by the tree to witness its terror firsthand. Months passed. Christmas came again, and the tree remained, silent yet watching. I never dared touch it without the mirrors in place. I realized the horrifying truth. Some things are not meant to be celebrated. They are meant to be feared. Now, every holiday season, I hear the faintest whisper, even when the house is empty. The tree knows I'm aware of its power, and it waits patiently, biding its time. Some Christmas trees bring joy, some bring memories. But this one watches, remembers, and waits. I have learned to respect its presence, for I know that should I let my guard down, it will claim me entirely. Some gifts of Christmas are more than ornaments. They are monsters in disguise. Thank you for staying with us through these 10 more disturbing Christmas horror stories. Dark Fears Family. Tonight, we ventured into quiet homes, snowy streets, and festive living rooms. Places that should have felt safe, yet hid shadows that whispered, watched, and waited. We met gifts that knew too much, trees that observed our every move, and laughter that twisted into screams. Each story reminded us that terror can creep into the most ordinary of places, and that even the warmth of Christmas cannot always keep the darkness away. If there's one thing these tales teach us, it's that some horrors are patient. They linger in corners, in reflections, and in the objects we hold dear. They are always watching, always waiting. And just because this video ends does not mean the fear disappears. So, as you hang your lights, wrap your gifts, and celebrate the season, remember, the world around you can sometimes be far darker than it seems. And maybe, just maybe, something is watching you too. If these stories chilled you to your core, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment sharing which story haunted you the most. Good night, and stay out of the dark.